Always forget to hit record. Brooke,
Hi, I'm trying to find my video there
hi.
for a second. I am the firm administrator for a law firm that's in Chattanooga. It also has a location in Colorado, and just wanted to jump on this call. I thought it was very interesting. I have some mediation experience as well, but my love is HR, so I thought this would be helpful.
That's awesome, Brooke. And I'm making up a story, so I use this when I practice. The story I'm telling myself is because you work in an attorney's office, the idea of potential boss whisperer might have some tips and tools that might come in
Hmm.
handy.
Yes.
You don't have to say, okay. Melinda, thank you, Brooke.
Hi, I'm Melinda Whitley. Shannon, I'm particularly interested in meeting you. I'm in Nashville, Tennessee, and I play with the symphony here where I am currently the union steward that I'm about to step out of. So I'm in the middle of conflict all the time. I was a graduate in 2024 from Lipscomb, where Kim did her work at Lipscomb. I ended up with my master's degree in conflict management. And so I've started doing a lot of mediation in the industry and even been hired by some other orchestras in other states. So I'm new, sort of new at this, but I've been in an orchestra for 27 years. So the industry I know really well, but I would like to get more involved in the mediation end of my new life and leaving, kind of making a career change at this late date. So I'll have to connect with you later.
Yeah,
Okay.
you all feel free to use the chat to do that. And Stephen, our guest of honor.
Well, hello everyone. Greetings from London, England. We have a tube strike today, so I have been cycling and taking trains around the city trying to get to various appointments. But I'm really glad that I arrived here with plenty of time, which was always a risk it might not have happened.
You give us a little bit of background in you before we dig into the concept of boss whispering.
Yeah, so I'm an executive coach. I work part-time for a government organization. And what I really love is helping people transform and grow. Um, and the thing that most consistently leads to growth and transformation of all the things that I do is the forgiveness work, and that led me into the conflict work. Um, and then the boss whisperer. Then I was like, well, the forgiveness work is so beautiful, but also you're clearing up after a mess. And like, wouldn't it be good if you could stop the messes from happening in the first place? And that led me to boss whispering. And there's an irony that boss whispering is quite well established in the United States and not really very well established here in the United Kingdom. So there's an irony that here I am, an English person talking to American people about something that your country is already much stronger on than I am. So yeah.
I, for one, had never heard of boss whispering. And yeah, I'm going to give you all an opportunity to ask questions and talk too. But you are the very first boss whisperer that I ever met. But you talked about forgiveness as being part of your coaching. How did you come to see forgiveness as a workplace tool rather than just a personal or spiritual concept? How did it become so powerful in your
Um, so it started out, so I wasn't immediately trying to help people forgive. There was an exercise that I had trained in, which was about difficult endings, and it was a group exercise. And everyone that came had been bullied. I don't know why, but that was the thing when I ran those workshops. And then I thought, okay, well, I let me see if I can. My work is one-to-one rather than group work, so let me see if I can do this on a one-to-one basis. And I was like, oh. I think what people are doing is forgiving. And then that led me into kind of developing a sales pitch on forgiveness. And then that led me to thinking, okay, I'm talking the talk, but I also need to walk the walk. So let me look at my life and are there things that I need to forgive? And there's a story I can share later about how that has led to really beautiful things for me. But your question was how is it in a business context? So um, when there is difficult workplace conflict, that can come with a lot of cost. So I mean, recent reports in England have said it's like in 30 billion pounds, so like $40 billion, even for a small country like England. And part of that cost is because people leave their jobs and they move on. An even bigger cost is actually when people move on, it means there's someone needs to get up to speed, and that costs many times more than actually the cost of recruiting someone. Also, if someone is resentful, um, then they're a bit bitter, and that means they're more likely to want to get revenge. And that so and in England, that means they can have an employment tribunal, or if they're working in financial services or law, where there's a regulatory interest in bullying. And it also has a so helping people and then the other part of helping people recover is that people lose their trust, they lose their confidence, and they lose their positivity. And if you don't have those things and they're not recovering, then you're going to be not performing at your best at work. So there's also a productivity as well as a kind of a risk and cost thing. There's an important productivity angle to it as well.
Yeah, so you're talking about the loss of institutional knowledge. And one thing I talk about when I'm talking with organizations is especially HR, right? They're trying to create some kind of stability. And every time somebody leaves, I say everything is a system. Even our family is a system, our office is a system. And when one thing changes, the whole system changes and has to change. So HR is dealing with this, huge turnover, especially in healthcare, this massive turnover, and you can't catch up to stabilize the system when you have people leaving and having to readjust every time somebody new comes in, create a new system. So finding a way to heal within the workplace as it is, yeah, can save a lot of money and all the reasons you said, but when you talk about the people carrying resentment or wanting to get even, I mean, that's at a personal cost. Like that,
Mm.
it matters for us too, like not just the organization saving money and decreased lawsuits and decrease in pay and turnover and all that kind of stuff. The people who actually work in the workplace, I think we all deserve sort of a better culture and better environment. And and I'm kind of summarizing what you say by saying that I kind of hear that that's what you're saying at the bottom of this. It's about the people.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So so forgiveness is often presented in a religious way. And it's presented as like you should do this because it's a good thing to do. And
Hmm.
I'm not saying there's no truth in that, but it's actually a very self-interested act. Because if you when maybe I'll just tell the story of resentment just to to understand forgiveness, you have to understand resentment. And many of us get, and I suffer from this as well, when we are feel we've been harmed or mistreated, we hold on to resentment in the hope of justice. But to stay resentful, we need to stay angry. But to stay angry, we need to stay in pain. And staying in pain, what that means, people are unaware of this. What it means is they artificially interrupt the body's natural healing process. So the things that get damaged with divorce or bullying is most commonly trust in others, confidence and positivity. And if you stay resentful, those things are just really, really slow to recover. And the other things can get damaged, but those are the most common ones. So and so forgiveness is the word for letting go of resentment. And all you do is it's like with resentment, you're keeping your kind of finger jabbed in the wound to stop it from the metaphorical wound to stop it from healing. And when you forgive, you just take your finger out of the wound, you allow time to heal, and people just naturally find that their confidence, their trust, and their positivity return. So it's very, very much a self-interested act. And it's an
So
act
helping
of
people, sorry,
it's an
helping
act it's
people
an
get
act of
their
healing.
finger out of their wound is
Ah,
what you're
ex
echoing. Yeah, my favorite
exactly.
definition of forgiveness is letting go of the hope that the past could have been different. Like that's my
Mm,
favorite definition, which can be hard. You were about to say
yeah.
something else. I'm sorry, Stephen.
No, that was all. That was all. Yeah.
Okay, so about this boss whispering, uh, when most people hear abrasive leader, Um, I mean, they maybe somebody who like is intimidating or actually enjoys pushing other people around comes to mind. But you've said that that's a myth. What do you actually find going on with abrasive leaders?
So there are two things that you find with abrasive leaders, but the relevant one for your question is that they are clueless. They're lacking in empathy. They're not deliberately lacking in empathy. They're lacking in empathy because of a difficult childhood, probably, and not being trained like many of us were trained to be empathic by our parents. But they are unaware of the effect they have on others. Um, and my mentor, who has been doing this for 4 decades, says in the hundreds of people that she's coached, and these are the worst behaved people on Wall Street. So you're talking a very special group of people, you know. Um, Only two genuinely seemed like they enjoyed causing harm. Two out of hundreds. Everyone else was clueless about the impact. They might know that they're direct and they're straightforward and they don't don't take any nonsense, but they have no idea that they are humiliating people, for example. They are just unaware of the impact they have on others.
So then walk us through the boss whispering process. How do
Okay.
they come to you and how do you make them aware? And then what next?
Yeah. So it's a very clever process, and actually the coaching is which is I'm a coach. The coaching is the least interesting bit of it. The most interesting bit is how do you get people to want to change? So, no one volunteers for this work to become a client. They're always sent by their manager. But managers are quite ill-equipped to deal with this sort of behavior, because so typically they'll say you shouted at so and so in a meeting. They say, no, I didn't. I raised my voice, but I didn't shout. And as the manager, I wasn't in the meeting. So I end up in a fact battle with someone else who's very good at arguing their corner, and they were there. And so in a fact battle, the abrasive leader is likely to win. So and also that another thing is that managers don't think change is possible. And if they don't think change is possible, then it's you're less likely to tackle something. So the first thing you need to do in the boss whispering process is actually to coach the manager of the abrasive leader, get them to deal with defensiveness, but also there's this beautiful phrase which is you're repeatedly generating negative perceptions. And the beauty of that phraseology is that you do not end up in a fact battle because it is a fact that there are negative perceptions. You can end up in fact battles as to what each perception might be and what's the truth behind it. But when you're saying there are repeated negative perceptions, and as the manager, you know that because you've had complaints about their behavior, so you are on very firm ground as the manager. So the manager says there are repeated negative perceptions, then they set limits and consequences. So the limit is that this needs to stop, these negative perceptions need to stop. And then consequences, sometimes these are explicit, sometimes they're implied. If you don't change, there are going to be consequences. And sometimes they might be spelled out very clearly, and sometimes they might be implied, but they are put so the abrasive leader is put under pressure to change. And then they're offered help. And the help is in the form of the boss whispering. So which they don't call it boss whispering, they call it kind of specialist coaching to deal with um negative perceptions. And so that's kind of so it's very important to get the manager, and also this work has a very high success rate, but it's not foolproof. And so there is a chance that a fair chance that you'll send someone on this coaching and they won't change. So the manager part of the preparing the manager and the coaching them is getting them to think, well, what will you do if they don't change? So they're thinking through what are the consequences for the organization? Am I prepared to put up with this anymore? What am I prepared to do if they don't change? So that's all part of, and so you don't always need to specify consequences if the manager is clear that they're going to tackle it, like that the energy will be different. Um, so that's kind of the setting up of the process, and then um, the abrasive leader comes for their first session, and they have been told that there are these negative perceptions, but they have no idea what they are, because I said they're one of the qualities that they're clueless, they're lacking in empathy, and so they've been asked to change something that they don't really understand. So the first thing I offer to do is to be a researcher on their behalf to find out what are these negative perceptions. And so they nominate around 8 of their colleagues who will have a view on what these negative perceptions are. So if they think, I can nominate my fan club, I can nominate my favorite people, you, you, by all means do that, but we're not going to find anything useful. We're not going to understand what these negative perceptions are if you nominate your fan club. So they have a bit of a hard think of who of their colleagues will have a view on what these negative perceptions are, and then they contact them all and say, I'm having some leadership and management training. I'm doing something that's a bit like a 360. Be really grateful if you could speak to Stephen and give him some feedback so I can improve my management skills, something like that. So this is part of the setup. And then I'd said one of the qualities, there are 2 qualities. So one is that they're clueless. The other is that they are highly anxious. And that's going to come as a surprise to many people, because people that throw their weight around don't look anxious, they look confident. Um, but they're doing it from a place of insecurity. So if someone is really secure and there's a member of their team who is underperforming, they're not going to feel threatened by it. They're not going to worry that their underperformance is going to undermine their performance. They're going to deal kind of calmly and straightforwardly with the underperformance. But the abrasive leader sees someone's slow, and they think their slowness will affect the perception of the other person's slowness will affect perception of their own work. And because they're highly anxious about that, that leads them to lash out around that person's slowness or whatever it is that they think they're not doing well enough. So you've got these two kind of typical characteristics of abrasive leaders, and those make people much more likely to be an abrasive leader. But they also very cleverly, those 2 features are used to make them want to change. So the first is I do these interviews. I'm very careful about how I write them up. So they're anonymized, that it's strictly confidential. Well, it's not strictly confidential, because the idea is to give feedback, but nothing is attributed to anyone. Anything that refers to the risk meeting, we won't refer to a risk meeting. If it looks like it's come from one person, I'll play around with the wording a bit. So it's people say that you have ... rather than you ... to me. So we're keeping as close to the original words of what people say, and you have themes, and you only have a theme if more than one person has said something. So if one person says that Stephen is always late to meetings, that doesn't go in this summary document. But if 2 or more people say that Stephen is always late to meetings, then that can be a thing that we include. So people taking part can be reassured that feedback is only included if it's collective, not if it's individual. And so they get this.
Let me interrupt real quick for
Yeah.
just a second, Stephen. So what you're saying is there's always 8 people who are asked to give honest feedback,
Yeah.
um, and you have to have at least 2 or more people agree that something is an issue before you generate it. And you do a lot of rewording to make sure that your manager can't look at this and say, your boss whisperee can't say, "Oh, I know that that came from Charlie."
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly.
In the
Yeah.
meantime, how's your victim doing though? The person who is there that you're going to work with, the leader, the abrasive leader. I wish we had a different term to call him. Um, is there a different term to call him?
I've found that abrasive leader is it's not a perfect word, but it's the one that works seems to work best for me.
Okay. Where are they in the process at this point since they're already anxious? How are you? I can't
So
imagine the unknown is very
yeah,
anxiety
so
producing.
so I it produces a lot of anxiety for them. And when they get the report, I don't email the report to them. We sit down and we go through it together. And when they get this, this is the lowest point of their career because finally they're seeing, because they're clueless about the impact of their behavior, they're finally seeing how others view them. And it's easy to dismiss one comment or two comments, but when you have nine or 12 different comments saying that Stephen has poor emotional control, or that Stephen humiliates people, or then it's hard to ignore. So you have the cluelessness that and the lack of empathy. Suddenly they're clued in to to how others view them, and that is super, super hard. I had someone recently who said, "Oh, this will be easy," and I thought, "No, it won't." And then they after said that was really tough. That was like super tough. Um, and then the other thing is that they're anxious, and they're only going to be sent for boss whispering if they're a high performer because it's a lot of work. So you're not going to do it for anyone. So it's only for a high performer. So these are people who in every other way are high performers at work, apart from their conduct. Every other way they're a high performer. That maybe they're bringing in huge revenue, great client relationships, really technically gifted. And then they discover that in one area of their work life, they're a poor performer, a really poor performer. So you have the kind of combination of anxiety, cluelessness, combined with pressure from their manager to change. And it's the alchemy of those three things that gets people to want to change.
Can just picture a bit that the leaders, the high performing leaders who are so busy performing that they lose sight of people.
Mm. I don't think it's just that though, Kim. So I think it's that they're already lacking in empathy. So they're very it's right, they're very focused on their goals and their corporate objectives, but it's also, other people can be focused on goals, but have empathy too. But
Yeah.
but interestingly, empathy of the character traits, empathy is amongst the most trainable of all the character traits. You're not going to go from low empathy to high empathy, but you can go from low empathy to functional empathy. And there's a lot of research that sort of backs that up.
Is that the goal then of the process?
Yes, yes, it's getting them
Okay.
to put themselves in the shoes of other people, to think about, and there's a framework. It's a kind of a classic. It's almost like an old school psychological framework of threat, anxiety, defense. So we feel a threat that generates anxiety, and that leads to a defense, which is either fight or flight. So it's kind of very classic Freudian psychology, and what they're doing in every situation is fighting or fleeing, or people around them are fighting or fleeing. And we say, well, what the work is to think rather than fighting or fleeing, how can you reduce the perception of threat if someone else is fighting or fleeing? How can you reduce the perception of threat so they don't need to fight or flee? And if you are fighting or fleeing yourself as the leader, can you find a way to work things through? Can you approach this differently in a more calm way?
So how do you get that shift from no empathy to functional empathy, which is a great term, but
It's
can you give us some of those ideas on the tools?
well, so I mean, the tool I've explained the tool is the threat anxiety defense, and what you do is you take mini case studies and you work them through, and you think, why are they behaving like in terms of other people? Why are they behaving that way? What could be driving that behavior? And then depending on what comes up, you might go, well, you've generated six theories as to why they're behaving that way. How could you find out which of those theories is the right theory? And sometimes that might be speak. It's not always the case, but sometimes you might speak to the individual and you're saying, I was wondering why you went to my manager and got got this thing approved without consulting me. And then they'll come back with an answer. And often the answer will be revealing as to what's really going on for that individual. So it's a question of starting to put yourselves into the shoes of other people and then testing out and then developing strategies. It's like, how can I get my objectives met without upsetting people in the process?
Can you give an example, Stephen, of
Oh, so that's really difficult because because I because the work is so confidential that there's so many, like, I don't really want to be telling stories. So one of the things with boss whispering is that nothing leaks from the boss whispering conversation. So there is
Mhm.
no, like, if the person doesn't engage with the process, I don't tell the manager that. I just say I've withdrawn. If you want to know, you need to speak to them. There is, when the interviews are done, that is just for the education of the client themselves. It's not for HR, it's not for their manager. So there is a lot of boundaries around things, to kind of, so I can't if I had a bit more time I would be able to concoct something, but the things I'm thinking of I don't feel I can say
Yeah, no, that makes
because they're kind
sense.
of directly from individuals.
I hear the trust and safety come up. Like you have to have a really high level. You have to provide a very high level of trust and safety in order for them to be able to be willing to have these conversations. This,
Absolutely. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
very similar to mediation. Okay, so you have them in, and and you're working on basically. It sounds like scenarios. You're almost doing maybe kind of role playing sort of things
Yeah,
to
close to
teach those
that. Yeah,
skills.
yeah.
Okay. And then what?
And then they go out and then they try it. So they try a different way of doing things and seeing what the results are. And it might be that they've got a theory that isn't right, and so they need to kind of have another theory. Or it might be that they don't really know why people are behaving in a certain way, so they have conversations with them, or with they have if that's not possible, they have conversations with other people about what they think might be driving people's behavior. So they're trying to get into the heads of other people and also into the heads of themselves to see why do they react in certain ways. What are their triggers?
So you're not giving them specific tools and how to do it moving forward.
No.
Wow. That's amazing. You're letting them figure it out for themselves.
Yeah. I mean, that's the challenge as the coach is to try and hold back from,
Coaching.
yeah, like giving solutions.
Wow. But I can see that how it would be so much more effective because even in
Mm,
mediation, we don't want to give solutions because when people figure it out. However, you also have to build in the trial and error part of that. They have to be allowed to, hey, that didn't work.
yeah.
Yeah. And does the workplace, like, how do they support that? Just knowing it, do they know it's part of the process or um, is your endpoint? It's like you will know we're done when what? Like, yeah.
So there's a couple of so what I say is that you'll start to see some changes after about 3 to 5 sessions. So you'll have an idea um that it's beginning to work. Um but there is a question of how well is it working because you've only got the client's feedback. So when it feels like we've made really good progress and things are settling, then I'll go back round to do a second round of interviews with those people, like a shorter, more of a pulse check. And what we might find is that themes 1, 2, 3, and 4 nailed it, going really, really well. Number 5, not so good. Number 6, still still needs work, and so therefore we refocus our energies on things. So there is a kind of a direct feedback loop rather than just the client's own perceptions. And then when we feel like we've gone as far as we can get, then that's when the process ends. But it's kind of 10 to 12 sessions,
How long is a session?
90 minutes.
I mean, that's not a long process.
No.
Yeah. I will 100% get these questions, but I want to point out something that I think is also very cool, and that is you are partnering with a college and a university to study the long-term effectiveness of these methods. I love when something's being studied, and I love that you go back and check with the people and say, "What do you see?" I mean,
Mm.
that's so cool. Um, tell all of us about the research.
Yeah, so the research is around the forgiveness work rather than the boss whispering. Um, so for a start, there is zero research on forgiveness and bullying, um, or workplace conflict. There's no research on that at all. So it's a real gap in the literature. Um, and it's very easy for a coach to hear nice stories that when people come back and say, Stephen, that was wonderful. It made a really big difference. But you probably hear back from the happy people, um, and probably don't hear back from the kind of like the people who aren't that bothered. So what I wanted to do was to put some rigor behind looking at the impact on this. And if I was doing a survey myself, it would ask, has your confidence recovered a little bit, a lot, not at all? But that's not how an academic approaches it. An academic, if you want to look at trust, will ask a series of kind of validated questions that have been proved time and time again are the best ways of managing trust,
Mhm.
measuring trust. And so they will ask questions um, about trust and about confidence, about positivity, that are actually measuring the level of it. And so therefore we'll be able to see, and also we'll be measuring forgiveness, the degree of forgiveness as well. So to what extent have people forgiven, and what correlation is there between forgiveness and these 3 things that I see improve? Um,
So they're measuring things that are already standardized and validated measurements of, in some ways, wellness or the lack thereof, and then how much forgiveness is taken and drawn on the correlation between those.
exactly. Yeah.
So for the HR professionals and leaders and um, yeah, managers that may hear this, what are the warning signs that someone on their team might be an abrasive leader who needs intervention rather than termination?
Okay. Well, so I would say they all need intervention rather than termination. So what I really like about this is that there is this assumption when you've got an abrasive leader, there's this assumption that you either tolerate them or you get rid of them. And it's kind of quite a binary thing. And what boss whispering shows again and again is that there is a third way. It doesn't work for everyone, but there is a third way. And actually, you can retain their skills for the organization, you can retain their contacts, you can retain their experience. And also, wouldn't you want to give someone the best chance of redeeming themselves? So I one of the words I use around the boss whispering is that it's redemptive work. It's giving people an opportunity to change their way. So that's the first thing I would say. Um, I can't remember what the rest of the question was.
No, I think you answered the question.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I really have concluded for myself from working with people in conflict that we don't have bad people. We have people with a limited skill set.
Mm, mm,
And if
mm.
people learn the tools to help them communicate when it's hard, it can change so much. I mean, we see it as conflict managers. We just see that it works through the process. Your focus is on empathy, which is interesting because I don't think I mean, I focus on perspective, which is empathy to some degree, but definitely in other tools as well that make communication better. But yours is also for those high achieving, high performing, what other word did you use to describe what kind of
Kind
leaders?
of super high performers. Yeah.
Super high performers. So if someone listening today recognizes themselves in what you're describing, which is contrary to the definition of it, right?
Yeah.
But if they're like, maybe I wonder if, just maybe, um, what would you want them to know? Or is someone carrying resentment from a workplace experience? I mean, from
Okay.
having that experience.
So it's sadly, it's very rare. So my mentor has never had anyone who's referred themselves for boss whispering. So I have actually heard of someone who is like a boss whisperer, and they actually had their first client was someone who said, I need help with this thing. But I think it's really like hen's teeth. It's really like super rare. But with forgiveness, um, if you're holding on to resentment, there are so many benefits you can get for yourself if you can let go. Um, and obviously you can come to a forgiveness coach like me, but that's not the only option. So you can get a forgiveness book. Every forgiveness book will have a forgiveness method that you can kind of follow and work through on your own. There's a couple of workbooks, a free workbooks online that you can use. You can use a kind of a personal practice where you say every day your desire to forgive and your inability to do it right now.
Mm.
Um, and that's a method that I used for myself that worked incredibly well. So forgiveness is just not thought about as something. It feels like it's a gift to the other person. And if you've been badly harmed by someone, like why on earth would you want to give a gift to someone who's harmed you? But when you realize that the gift is for you, um, then that really changes the thought process around doing it.
Yeah, amazing. So I'm going to do the questions here. If you, Deborah, you want to unmute and just ask it, or you want me to read it?
Yeah, please go ahead and read it. Thank you.
Okay. Do they also at least partially attribute their past success to their being abrasive? It's worked in their view and point to their high performance to explain their resistance to change. I don't disagree with that, Deborah. I think that's very astute. It's like people do what works, right? Like,
Yeah.
well, I get what I want when I do that. Yeah.
Yeah, so they think that their direct style of management, but is what gets results. So absolutely that is the case. But when they come for the coaching, they're the pressure from the manager and the feedback from the colleagues is showing them that you can continue to be straightforward and direct, but without the humiliation, for example. So you
Yeah,
can
that
find another way to
mm,
use the strengths that are within that, but in a different way. In, in
yeah,
a
they
in a
almost
in
have
a
to
different
find
way.
another tool then. If they believe that is their strength, to have to let that go and trust something else will also
Mm,
get results. Ooh, that's a lot.
yeah.
Melinda asks, are you usually hired by the client or the workplace?
Oh, always by the workplace. Yeah, never by the client,
By that person's manager
by their manager or by HR. Yeah.
or by HR? Okay. Michael asks, have you used 360 surveys to measure strengths and areas to develop and measure progress?
Okay. So the interviews are a version of 360, really. So I think back to early in my career when I was involved in doing a 360 for my manager, and I didn't write anything that I was embarrassed or ashamed to say, but he said to me, "Oh, I saw that comment and I knew it was from you." Um, and maybe the new AI tools can kind of neutralize and reword things. So maybe in the future we don't need to have this quite labor intensive round of interviews. Um, but a kind of a classic 360 tool. I think that this method is gives more anonymity and therefore more safety and therefore more people be more willing to be honest about the limitations of the abrasive leader.
I think there's a value in letting the other people be heard through an interview
That
as
too, yeah,
well, as
yeah.
opposed to just writing something on paper, especially if they're going to move toward forgiveness.
Mm.
Paula asks, is there a particular curriculum that you use to help people with forgiveness that you personally use regarding forgiveness?
So I don't have a curriculum, but I have a method that I've developed myself. I call it a forgiveness ritual because it feels like a ritual to me. So we spend the first half of the coaching session most with talking a bit about what happened, but mostly me going through a pitch of why forgiveness is a self-interested act for yourself. And when people get to the end of that, they are and also addressing all because there are many misconceptions. There's around 12 that I've identified, many misconceptions around forgiveness. Like, for example, there's this idea that um the other person should apologize before I forgive them. Um, I mean, that definitely helps, right? If someone makes a sincere apology, I'm more likely to forgive. You're more likely to forgive if you receive a sincere apology. But to put your future healing in the hands of someone who has shown little regard for your well-being and to wait for their apology is a little foolish. Um, um, and in fact, forgiveness is an internal process around myself. It's not, there's no need for me to say to the other person, I forgive you. It's something that happens inside me. Um, so we have this kind of discussion around forgiveness and the misconceptions of forgiveness. And then there's this ritual, and the first stage is that they repeat sentences which capture the essence of what happened. So we're not smoothing over, we're not pretending it didn't matter. We're saying it really did matter, and here is what happened. Then the second step is that when people when the harm happened, people were victims. But when people stay resentful, they're staying in a victim space.
Mhm.
And a victim thinks that only bad things happen. So to move them into a more empowered space, I get them to think about what goodness was there during that time. Um, and this is in the workplace. So when I was in that role, what good things happened? Good things I gave, good things I received, and if possible, one good thing that came from the person I'm really angry at. And I'm surprised that most people are able to come up with at least one good thing. It's surprising, despite really kind of difficult stories, they can often find one good thing that came from the person that harmed them. And then we they speak out some sentences of forgiveness. And then I check in about how that feels. And there's kind of two responses. One is that it's okay, like I've done it, through to I feel like a weight's come off my shoulders. And then the other is, well, I was repeating your words, Stephen, but I didn't quite feel them, or I'm 80% there. And if they're in the latter category, I then get to say there's some sentences about the consequences they accept for their life by not forgiving and by staying resentful. And those words are so sharp that most people are then saying, okay, I give up. You win. I'm going to forgive this person. Um, yeah, so that's the
That's powerful.
and actually then there's an exercise at the end of it, a visualization exercise of gathering back the qualities. I said it's all about restoring the healing process and getting back the things that got damaged, the trust, the confidence, the positivity, and people have a guided exercise around gathering those qualities back. So that's the process. Um, some people, when I follow up a year later, some people are fully forgiven, like around a quarter. Most people have partly forgiven, and there's a small minority who thought they had forgiven, but actually it slips away over time. So it's a difficult forgiving is a difficult process, and it's not that one intervention solves it for everyone, but for most people it moves them along that journey.
My understanding of forgiveness is it's a bit like grief. You don't entirely maybe get over some things, but repeating the process again helps get you out of that stuck space.
Mm,
It's yeah. Maybe some things can be done once, but when they come back again, they now have a process, right, for being able
yeah.
to work through it to get back to that space where they're experiencing the wholeness of themselves, like you described with that
Mm,
final visualization instead of the impact. So I would be surprised. I mean, I would think you would need to be able to repeat as needed, that
yeah.
process, repeat
Mm.
as needed. Yeah. Um, so I just want you to know that I do have Stephen provided some resources and I'll send those out. I also want to say that one of my favorite books, Why Won't You Apologize on Apology and Forgiveness, it's by Harriet Lerner, who also wrote The Dance of Anger, The Dance of something else, like it's not coming to my mind, but I really, really like her books. And one of the things in the dance of anger is whose problem is this? Whose responsibility is it to make something better? Um, in our discomfort, or if something's a conflict to us, is it somebody else's job to change that or our job to figure out how to deal with it? So I like Harriet Lerner a lot, and I did enjoy Why Won't You Apologize a lot too. And for those mediators who apology comes up in their work, it models some really good apologies. Lars says this is awesomely useful and interesting. Thank you. Yeah, your process sounds incredible on the apology. Would you be able to share? I'll send those. And number one, a study of Wall Street abrasives that showed only two truly trying to be abrasive, the rest were clueless. And the study that shows can't move from low to high empathy, but can go from low to functional. Are there any studies on that? I think you said this was not studied.
So there's I don't know the research very well, but there is a lot of research on character traits, but particularly on empathy, and there's quite a lot of research out there. So you'd have to look that up yourself. I don't know the references.
It is true. It is a learnable skill. It is. And it's partly a shared characteristic from, that we've inherited, a trait perhaps toward empathy, but also it's quite learnable. Michael says that's what Marshall Goldsmith discussed in What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And
Mm.
tell me about that, Michael.
Oh, that was when we were talking about how oh sorry. People people attribute their maybe bad behavior to what made them successful and are reluctant to change it. But Marshall's book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There, talks about how you may have been successful getting to this point, but if you really want to develop into what he coaches into the higher level executives, you need to uh, adapt that behavior.
I love that. I'm
Mm.
gonna I'm gonna look that book up. It's kind of like things work until they don't, or our coping skills get us somewhere until they stop being coping skills and start hurting us more. Yeah, that's very cool. I'm gonna get that book. Shannon says, I'm interested in how you interrupt the path from threat to anxiety, particularly in management where relationship is high versus mediation from a third party.
So see if I can bring an example in that's not mine. So you might be a leader who's getting frustrated because your team don't come up with good ideas in the meeting. And then you think, well, you know, is that behavior fight or flight? And they'll say, well, that's flight because they're they're not they're not engaging. And then so what threat might be what might be the threat that's causing that? Um, and then they need to come up with some theories. And one theory they might come up with is that, and they might need to speak to some people. So they might come up with some theories and then ask people, why do you think people don't speak in the meetings? And then they might discover that people get torn to pieces when they make a suggestion by the leader. And so the leader then needs to think about how can they create more psychological safety so that people don't feel the threat in that meeting, and therefore that they kind of feel safe to bring their ideas.
Shannon, I think if I'm hearing you right, if I were working with an organization, we would have that conversation at the table with everybody there, and they would have to be able to input that, and people would learn from just having that conversation. Is that what you're?
Yeah, I was thinking more from one individual to another. So if you have someone who perceives their anxiety leads them to perceive a lot of threat, how you interrupt that cycle for that person in that moment. And I hear a lot of this from a mediation perspective of like, how do you as a mediator step in? But I think similar to forgiveness in the workplace, there's not a lot of conversation around when you how do you interrupt that cycle for someone that you want to coach or want to do better. I think generally the response is kick them to the curb, right? So I was just interested more from person to person.
Yeah, so you're getting the leader to think about how they are. If people are behaving in a fight or flight way, there must be a perception of threat. So if there's a perception of threat, what could it be in my behavior that is causing that? So this is kind of like it could be in a group context like I gave before. It could be on a one-to-one basis. So it could be, for example, that someone has got a rival, and they're behaving in fight behavior, and it's like, well, what's the threat that you're going? And it might be
Mm.
that, well, they're after the same work as me. So how can you reduce that perception of threat? And you might be thinking, okay, maybe I can maybe I can try and make friends with them. Maybe I can take an interest in their work. Maybe I can compliment them. Maybe I can take them out for a coffee. Um, so it's getting to think a bit differently about how you can reduce that perception of threat. Or you could even ask, if
Mm.
someone was feeling threatened by you, but they were anxious rather than they were aggressive, what would you do to reassure the anxious person? And I think, okay, well, maybe could you use some of those techniques with the aggressive person?
I like the question. What's the threat? Okay. Deborah asked, do you have an intake process or a definition between abrasive and abusive? In Canada, a company risks liability for harm done if they continue to employ an abusive employee. How do I separate the behavior, like the person from the problem kind of thing, or whether it's abusive or abrasive, abusive or abrasive?
So we don't have that here in the UK. But I would go back to my point that there's this kind of assumption with abrasive, abusive people that the only option is to tolerate it, which is not sounds like it's not legally an option, or to get rid of them, which seems like therefore is the only option. And what the boss whispering can do is it can help these abusive and abrasive people to change their behavior. So rather than just automatically saying that person needs to leave, it's like see if we can get them to change first.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I had a friend of mine call the other day and said, I'm going to ask you because you're a conflict manager. And they described someone like that. And she very much wanted them to be gone from a leadership position. But it's because no, it's just like not recognizing that there's another path for them. Do you work with clients overseas?
I don't at the moment, but I'm always open to new clients. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. This was just as fascinating as I hoped it would be. And thank you all for joining us. And I will send out Stephen's stuff and I'll send out a link to the recording here in case there's stuff you want to pick up on. I know there was that how holding on to unforgiveness, we have to hold on to anger. I mean, I was picturing a lot of my, former clients who are choosing to hold on to anger because they don't know how to let that go or what they lose by letting that go. You point out what you gain by letting that go, and I really, really like that. So thank you very much.
And thank you everyone for your good questions. Really enjoyed being challenged by them all. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye, y'all.
Bye bye.